My name is Audrey Emrine Beardsley. I'm an associate professor at Arizona State University, and at ASU we have developed a show titled Inside the Academy, during which we interview some of the top educational researchers and scholars in the field of education. Today I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing Dr. Elliot Eisner. Dr. Eisner, thank you for being interviewed today.
Thank you for inviting me. This seems to me to be a wonderful, exciting, interesting project.
Wonderful. First, we're going to talk about becoming Elliot. You were born in 1933 in Chicago. Tell us about your family and childhood.
Well, how much time do you have? Born in 1933, that makes me 79.
Good.
I was never good in math. I had a mother and a father, and a brother, and a family that lived in Chicago. And my father ran a grocery and a store that sold vegetables and things of that kind. So it wasn't a wealthy family. It wasn't a poor family either. And one of the interesting things is that if you ask somebody who lives in a neighborhood that's quite modest, has limited income, they're likely to say that they're middle class. Because we define ourselves in relation to other people. And if people around the neighborhood are of the same class by definition as you, then you take that as a norm. So that's what happened with my family. And the most significant experience during my childhood was the realization that I had some ability in the visual arts as someone who made pictures. And the pictures that I made at that time were initially made by my cousin Ethel, who used to make drawings in the apartment that we occupied. She was good in art, and I used to copy her images. And in copying her images, I got praise and rewarded. So drawing for me was a source of accomplishment. This was really important because I did not do well in elementary school. I did not do well in elementary school. I didn't do well in high school. I graduated from high school with, in the, what was it? It was the 22nd percentile of my high school graduating class. So I wasn't no shining star during that period of my life. But we had a family that was warm, interacted a lot, argued a lot. That's important. Argued a lot. I remember my father engaged in an argument with a member of another family, and they were over the house, the apartment I should say, because it wasn't the house. And my mother would listen to this debate going on in the other room, and she'd say, "Louis, stop arguing." And he would respond, "Eva, I'm not arguing, I'm discussing." So they had different ideas about what was appropriate, what wasn't. And that was important for me to see that. But the second most important thing that happened during that particular period was Miss Eva Smith, my third grade elementary school teacher, noticed that I made nice drawings. So she told my mother about my nice drawings, and she suggested to my mother that she enroll me in the Art Institute of Chicago's junior school, which is for elementary, secondary school students, and that I had this gift and it could be promoted, refined, developed, and that was going to be good. I didn't have a gift. They thought I had a gift. And so I started going to the Art Institute of Chicago. That was a turn on, because all my friends are hanging on the walls of that building. Not my literal friends, my figurative friends.
Sure.
And I'll tell you a little story. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago as a student from high school. I did not go to a college. I did not go to a university. I did not go to a trade school. I went to the school of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I said my friends were hanging on the walls. I meant all of these images that had been created throughout Western history. There was one painting there by Gertrude Stein that was hanging on the wall there, and I would pass that painting every time I walked up the stairs to my painting class. And I didn't like the painting. I did not like the painting. One day I said to my painting teacher, Briggs, his name was Briggs Dyer, a Southerner. He said, Briggs, I don't like that painting of Gertrude Stein, and why do we have it up? It's not a very good painting. One of the eyes is crossed. He looked at me and he said, Elliot, you will like that painting. It's a profound idea that over time, if you look hard enough, you're going to find qualities that are rewarding that you didn't notice when you started. And that was really important. So, elementary school was difficult. I did not do well. I had a highly interactive family. They never confused, so to speak, argument for discussion. Baloney, they discussed argument and discussion a lot. And a number of other things. Meals were terribly important. Meals were terribly important.
Speaking of that, tell us about your love of pickled herring.
My love of pickled herring developed when I was 4. One of the things that happens in a Jewish household, in many households I should say, was that on Sunday they would bring back smoked herring, pickled herring, various types of vegetables, etc. Good bread, and we would all gather around, eat it and talk, and it's something that I miss. We don't have that here in beautiful California. We don't have some of the less beautiful physically, but more beautiful emotionally people who are engaged with each other. So that's where pickled herring started, and its significance is symbolic as well as gustatory.
What did you learn in school that ultimately inspired the educational scholar you became?
What I learned in school is how dull it is. And that's no joke. Sitting in a classroom in the 4th grade looking at a wall clock hanging 5 or 6 or 7 feet off the ground. I used to watch the hand of the clock make its move across the dial. And when it hit 3 o'clock, everybody was dismissed.
Sure.
Well, I remember I didn't have my homework that day. And the teacher was calling on people to finish up their work, and leave the room. It's fine. We'll pick up the rest of it the following day. And she held me out. In other words, she knew that I didn't have the homework. And I knew that she knew that I didn't have the homework. And rather than giving me an early dismissal, she held me out to the very end of when that hand was on the 12. Well, school wasn't much of a joy. I'll tell you what was a joy intellectually. What was a joy intellectually was in being engaged in the debates and discussions and arguments and emotion and ideas that people in my family had. That's what was enjoyable. I could see the flush come into their cheeks and sometimes the tears in their eyes when they're engaged in debate, because my dad was slightly pink politically. He'd make a strong socialist, was concerned with social justice, concerned with other people's well-being as well as his own. He was the vice president of a union. So he was into it. And that taught me a lot. To see people talking about labor issues and equity and income, fairness, taught me that you can get excited about these things. And that in settings in which you can get excited are a lot better, easier to take than settings where you're watching the hands of the clock go around the dial. So I remember coming close to high school graduation, and I wasn't quite sure what I should do after high school. We talked about it with friends, etc. And most of my friends were taking the college prep program, even though I wasn't very hot about it. And I walked up to this counselor at the school that I attended, which was a school that served, high school that served 4,000 students. It's not a small school. She asked me a few questions, and then she came to art. She said, "You're going to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, is that right, Elliot?" "Yes, that's right." "How do you feel when you go into that building and look at those pictures?" I said, "I feel terrific. It turns me on." I didn't say that, but that's what it meant. He said, "If it turns you on, then that's where you should go to school." And that's what I did. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago because it turned me on, which isn't a bad criterion, and I wish we had in this country a commitment to education which has to do with getting turned on. Getting turned on. It deals with matters of meaning, with movement, with internal satisfactions, excitement. Not a bad agenda.
An enlightened eye.
The enlightened eye. The Enlightened Eye, I'll tell you, The Enlightened Eye. That book I happen to like. I wrote it, but among the books that I've written, I really like that book. One of the ideas that I've developed for the field of education and other social sciences has to do with the refinement of perception. I worked during high school, and this is going to be related to what I'm going to say about engagement. I worked in a shoe store on Saturdays and Sundays. And this shoe store was the Sample Shoe Store, is the name of the shoe store, the Sample Shoe Store. And it operated on Maxwell Street in Chicago. Maxwell Street is like Delancey Street in New York. And I had been taken to that shoe store for several years by my father. The shoes were cheaper and sometimes better than you'd get in an ordinary shoe store. So what does this have to do with education? Well, a lot more than one can tell in an afternoon. But these shoes were often damaged slightly. And I had to know when I was selling the shoe what the condition was. And I needed to know what style. Was this a stacked heel or a plain heel? Was this leather or was it plastic? Did it have a platform or was it without a platform? And that taught me to see even more than the courses that I was taking. This is a little bit of a exaggeration, but even more than the courses that I was taking in art. You had to look at a shoe. You had to see what its heft is. Is it the right weight for something this size? There's a zillion kinds of things, and that develops connoisseurship. You become a connoisseur, and what made it particularly interesting and demanding was none of these shoes were alike. This was not Tom McCann, you know, where you have one style of shoe which covers the whole population of shoes. You had to pick out a shoe of which there might only be one of its style in that shoe store. And I only worked in the weekend, as I mentioned, but during the week they sold shoes. Now when you're selling shoes, you got to know where they are. If you got a platform shoe in green, you need to know where it is, and where I had to remember is where it was last week. It might not be there. They don't sell all the shoes in 1 week. My problem was that box up in the corner of the room. There's a green platform ladies shoe, and I go up there, pull it out. There might or there might not be. So you really have to think of it, get the memory going. Connoisseurship is looking for subtleties that have some significance regarding the function or form of the object being addressed. And in shoe selling, certainly at the Sample Shoe Store in Chicago, you had to take into account a number of other things. So being persuasive, speaking to somebody in a persuasive way without being offensive is really terribly important. Connoisseurship, criticism in the sense of broadening sense, not negative.
Sure.
Emerged out of that field.
So you then attended college at Roosevelt University in Chicago and ultimately earned your bachelor's degree in art and education. Tell us about that.
Roosevelt University was a liberally oriented university that made it possible for people in the course of 3 or 4 years to get a bachelor's or master's degree. Well, it dawned on me late in my career that it would be a good idea to try to get a bachelor's degree, and Roosevelt seemed to be the place to do it. So I went to Roosevelt, and while I was teaching at the Francis Parker School in Chicago, which is a high-powered private school, it dawned on me that I could do more. So I looked around and found the University of Chicago. Actually, before Chicago, I went to IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology. Now, the virtue of the Illinois Institute of Technology is it had a program of design education that helped people understand the relationship of form and function on whatever particular task they happened to engage in. So I went to Illinois Institute of Technology to get a master's degree while I was taking courses at Roosevelt University to have a bachelor's degree. And in addition, I started working at Vogue Wright Studios, which is a big commercial art studio that prepares people to work in that industry. I had a very mindfully simplistic job. It was to make very small line drawings with black India ink of the inside zipper of men's coats. So I was making these drawings, and it dawned on me, am I going to be a zipper drawer? That's not what I wanted. So I started taking courses at the University of Chicago, which was another package entirely. Chicago made a deep impact on my psyche, and much of what I do now is related to what I learned then. Not because they explicitly taught it, although some of the courses taught ideas that I use today, but because of the atmosphere, the orientation to inquiry, the debates in classrooms that I found at Chicago that I had not found in most of the courses at the university, secondary or elementary school level. I remember the first course I took at Chicago. I was looking at the catalog for courses to be offered at the next quarter, and I found one course. It was called Theory of Group Work. Theory of Group Work. There was a man standing behind the counter who was processing students. And I said, "Excuse me, this course, Theory of Group Work, who's it taught by? And is it any good?" He says, "Oh, it's very good. You'd probably enjoy it." I said, "Well, what do they do there?" He said, "Well, they look a lot, and they talk a lot, and they reason a lot, and that's a good reason for going. And it's taught by a man by the name of Bruno Bettelheim." Now, Bruno Bettelheim at that time was among the world's most prominent child psychoanalysts. And so here I was, sitting in a classroom of 20 people around an oval table discussing ideas that came from Germany mostly. Anyhow, I was working on a second master's degree at Chicago at that time. While I was working on this second master's degree, we had to take master's comprehensive examinations. Anyhow, I took that test and I attended the courses, and I was always a little bit of a troublemaker. And I got a note from a professor asking me if I had considered doing doctoral work at the Department of Education at the University of Chicago. Well, that's all I needed to know. I went to see him and applied and got admitted to the doctoral program. So I had a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and working on a doctor's degree, like I was collecting. Chicago was powerful, as I said, because it problematized things. It treated ideas in a scholarly way. It kept the conversation going. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Among all of the experiences I've had in universities, that has to be among the most important for me. So I enjoyed my time there.